You've landed at Spark Launch, the guide star for embracing what it means to be neurodiverse. I'm Mike Cornell, joined by CEO of Spark Launch, Chaya and Here, we navigate mental health triumphs and tribulations from all across the spectrum, charting a course through the shared experiences that unite us, and discovering how to embody the unique strengths within neurodivergent and neurotypical alike, igniting your spark and launching it into a better tomorrow. Hello there, I'm Mike.
I'm Chaya.
And today we are joined by Dr. Pegi Price, a professor and program director at National University with over 25 years of experience in law, higher education, and dispute resolution. She's an award-winning educator and legal expert known for her work on families and special needs children, divorce, and family law. An accomplished author and speaker, Pegi's work helps families and legal professionals navigate some of the most complex issues around justice, health, and equity. Thank you for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Pegi. Your background is so interesting. You have a blend of law, family situations, and higher education. So why don't you share about how you got about doing all these things and why is it so important to you?
Well, I've been a lawyer since 1986, and then I married and had a child who was diagnosed with autism in the late 1990s. And I had done quite a few divorces for clients over the years. And when I got divorced in 2001, I realized that the standard procedures and standard forms and standard court processes were grossly inadequate for a divorce that involves a person with special needs. And so I made my own. And then by word of mouth, I started handling a lot of cases for other people, cases that involve children with special needs, and some on parents who have special needs. And by cases, I mean divorce, paternity, custody, child support modification, family law cases. And there's a lot of information, both statutes and case law, on how special needs should be handled in the context of education, housing, and employment, but not so much about the family court system. And I realized that if I weren't already a lawyer, and my child was 6 years old when I got divorced and nonverbal, and if I hadn't already completed autism therapist training, I would not have had a clue as to what issues the court needed to handle. And if the court hadn't addressed those issues in our case, there would have been negative repercussions for the rest of our lives. Then I eventually wrote a law book for the American Bar Association called The Special Needs Child in Divorce, and that was for lawyers and judges, basically raising awareness and educating them on, first of all, here's how you can recognize and identify when you have a case that needs to be handled differently because of special needs. And here are the areas that needed to be treated differently. And that was published in 2009. And then the next year, I wrote a similar guide, but more approachable because it was for the parents. It was a guidebook for parents that taught them to realize what topics needed to be addressed with their lawyer and with the court, how to work with their lawyer, and what kind of evidence judges tend to find compelling in these cases. That was published in 2010. And then in 2023, after going through the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'd been involved in some legal webinars on how the pandemic was impacting families with special needs, the American Bar Association asked me to write the second edition of the book. And in addition to updating it, because it had been over 10 years, and they wanted me to add some additional information, which I did, including a section on how to handle special needs cases when a family with an adult with special needs goes through the family courts, and crisis planning. We learned a lot of hard lessons during the pandemic when families were in crisis, when they had a lot of conflict and the courts were not open. And so they could not turn to the legal system to resolve their disputes. and let's say it was an issue about parents disagreeing on the medical care of a child, and a doctor saying the child needed surgery and one parent refusing, how do you deal with those issues? And any other medical or therapeutic issues. On the special needs adults going through the family court system, that could be someone whose parents went through divorce with a special needs child, and then over time, that child ages out of the system, becomes emancipated, is no longer the subject of child support, and how does that person live and survive? Or it could be special needs adults get married, have children of their own, and roughly half of people who get married divorce. So just on the numbers game, some of those are going to be special needs adults with children. What issues does the court need to handle in those cases? And then a third category for that section of the book is people who do not have special needs, get married, have children, and then one of them has a devastating diagnosis like late-stage cancer or neuromuscular condition that leaves them needing high support, or car accident. A lot of different things can happen in life where someone without special needs is going about their life, and then all of a sudden life changes. How does the court handle those situations? How should they? So that's how I got into all of this with special needs and the family court system.
So what you did was you took your own personal experience with your child and with your experience with the law, and you identified that missing piece and started providing solutions for both the parties. One is the law community who didn't have awareness, to the special needs families, and then the families who are going through divorce and family conflicts who had no idea with the law. So how far from the first time you started have we come as a society right now?
Not as far as we need to. We have made some progress. I speak at law conferences, special needs conferences, podcasts like this, trying to increase awareness of the situation, because the law is not currently set up to address these issues for the families. The law moves very slowly. It's hard to make changes in the law. And no matter how convinced a judge might be that doing the right thing for the family is essential, a lot of them feel their hands are tied because they would have to deviate from the current law. They don't want to be taken up on appeal. They don't want to lose on appeal and get reversed and have to do the whole trial over. And that's understandable. I mean, the judges are in a difficult spot, but some of them have found ways to meet these families' needs. And there are ways to make a ruling, make a decision in a case as a judge where you can say, we're deviating from the law because of these extraordinary circumstances. And then they itemize or identify the circumstances and then issue their ruling. Also, in a few states, some people in the legislature have special needs children of their own, or they have close family members or friends who have gone through the family court experience with children with special needs and found that their needs were not addressed and that the judges could not address them because of the law in their state. And so they enacted legislation to try to address some of the issues, primarily the child support calculations, because states use tables and they put into the standard worksheet, they put in each parent's gross income, for example, and then their living expenses, the number of children, the cost of health insurance for the children, those kinds of really nuts and bolts numbers. And in some states now they allow for an additional amount to be considered on the charts, child support charts, for extraordinary expenses. And some of the states it says extraordinary educational expenses. Well, anyone with a child with special needs knows that the education expenses are only one very small bite of that pie. And a lot of people use the extraordinary education expenses for things like, oh, well, these children are going to an expensive private school because their parents went to the same private school, and it's a legacy issue, not a special needs issue. And that's how those changes in child support charts also get used. But very little has been changed on the legislation, and the judges often feel their hands are tied if the laws of their state don't allow them to do what they want to do. So far as educating the legal community, speaking at law conferences is very interesting for me, because at the beginning of teaching a workshop, for example, which is often around 90 minutes, I will read the faces of the judges and lawyers in the audience, and they'll be like, oh, this is going to be kind of a over-the-top talk, and it's going to be ridiculous and exaggerated, overblown. And about 10 minutes into it, I see their faces, their expressions change. And when they each have their aha moments, then it's quickly followed by a look of despair on their faces when it hits them how many families they've either represented as lawyers, or the cases came in front of them as judges, and they didn't do what family really needed. And they're heartbroken, because I also go into the consequences of not addressing these issues, of using the cookie cutter forms and court processes in these cases, which is not appropriate.
What ways have you found, as far as like evidence or discussing with the judges, help them better understand the challenges that these families face? You're dealing with special needs children or older kids.
What I do is I go through point by point the different aspects of the divorce where things need to be handled differently and why. For example, on financial aspects and child living out of a suitcase and transitions being difficult and how that needs to be crafted better, that the child, they might need to deviate from the standard age of emancipation from child support, what they should do about the primary caregiver's retirement funds, and how to handle conflicts, and how to change the parenting plan for a family that has a child with special needs. And what further complicates it is not all families have only one child. So if they have, say, a child with special needs and another child who is a typical child without special needs, how do you craft a parenting time schedule? You try to meet the needs of the special needs child, but you can't neglect the other child. They can get lost in the shuffle. And just using the cookie cutter standard form is not appropriate for the child with special needs, but using the special needs parenting plan is not appropriate for the child who is neurotypical or otherwise typical. And a solution that I found that seems to work pretty well is to schedule in time every month, one or two times per month, for each parent separately with the typical child. And it might be, every other Saturday for 3 hours in the afternoon. They just spend time, the two of them together. It doesn't affect the calculations that much on parenting time, because that can be an issue in some cases. But if you look back, unless you were an only child, if you grew up in a family with any other kids and you're looking back on your childhood and thinking of how much time you got to spend one-on-one with one of your parents, a time block, there might not have been that many. So it's a challenge, and a lot of children miss out on that, especially when the family separates. But creating those memories and those parental bonds and supporting those situations seems to be not much time spent out of the typical, but quite impactful for the amount of time that it involves. So many things, when I speak specifically about those issues, like sick days, things like this need to be written in the parenting plans, not just assumed, well, any good parent would do this. Some people aren't good parents, and they will put the fight with their spouse or former spouse ahead of what's best for the child, and they can't even see how it's hurting the child, even when someone tells them that it is. And if the parenting plan and other court documents don't tell them they have to do certain things in a certain way, they say they don't have to the extent of not taking children for their medical treatments, doctor visits, or therapy, if any of those appointments fall in the other parent's schedule in their parenting time, they will say, no, my time is to have fun with my child, and the therapy and the work of parenting a special needs child, that can happen on the other parent's time. I have the parental right to do what I want with my child during my time. And I respect parental rights, but I prioritize them lower than what is in the best interest of the child. Or, for example, some parents, if their child's special need is brain cancer or some other type of cancer, and the child is undergoing chemotherapy, and one parent takes the child to their regular scheduled chemotherapy, and then the other parent has parenting time right after the treatment, don't take the kid to the zoo and drag them all around when what they really need is to spend the rest of the day maybe in bed watching cartoons, recuperating from the chemotherapy. I know it's your parental right to have fun with your child, but think about the child. Put their interests first. Those kinds of things.
What you talked about points to the fact that there are all kinds of parents, the good parents, bad parents, the in-between parents. And so it's so important for all your recommendations to be written so that you're creating some form of a blueprint that people can use as a guide. And on top of it, of course, understand each and every family and child, because everyone's so different. So I see you are doing a lot of work, putting yourself out there, talking at every opportunity that you get. But I feel it's just a lot of work for one person to do. So what do you see? What would you like the lawmakers to do so that we can accelerate the process?
Pass more legislation that addresses these issues. There are guidebooks out there now, because I've written them, that legislators could just get a copy of those books. I mean, a lot of law libraries, either in law schools or courts around the country, have these books. The judges and lawyers just need to walk into the library and check out the book and read it and apply it. I mean, they don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's right there for them. And I do want to mention one thing slightly off topic. Parenting ability has nothing to do with gender. Regardless of a person's gender, they can be a good parent, they can be a great parent, they can be a mediocre parent, they can be a lousy parent. It has nothing to do with gender. Moms aren't always the best parent. Dads aren't always the best parent. It's the individual who decides to prioritize their child's needs that is a good parent. And in a lot of these cases, they're both good parents, and they both really do want what's best for their child.
Thank you for pointing that. And it's so true. It's not about the gender. It's about their hearts and how they want to treat their child and put the child who has no power first before them. So thank you for mentioning that.
Happy to do so. Sometimes people might come away with the misunderstanding that I'm, for example, trashing the dads. And I have no intention of doing that. In fact, some of the most amazing parents of special needs children that I came across when I was practicing law were dads. And they would put their entire careers on hold. And their approach was, this is my child. This is my heart. And whatever it takes, I'm going to do it. And there are moms who've done the same thing.
I wish everybody would do that.
Yes. And a lot of states have what they call parent education classes that are required before you're allowed to have your divorce finalized, where if two people who are divorcing have at least one child in common, they must go through this parent education training program. It usually involves like 3 hours at a community center or something like that, where they have a few speakers and they have materials. They could easily add something that increases awareness of special needs in the existing parent education programs that the courts already require people to do.
I agree. I feel it should just not be during the case of a divorce. We should have parent education classes just like that for no rhyme or reason, because who know we have instincts for sure. As a mother, I know I have instincts, but I didn't have awareness of how to raise a neurodivergent child. I myself, being neurodivergent, didn't have any of that awareness. So I wish there would be these educational centers for parents just opening up, even workshops, 1 day workshops, 3 day workshops, where we can learn a lot and avoid conflicts and a lot of pain, and maybe even avoid a divorce.
That's a very good idea. And I've often thought, you have to jump through a lot of hoops to legally drive a car, but there's no license you have to get to have a child. And which one's more important? And which one is more complicated? And a lot of judges, and by the way, I practiced law for 25 years. I saw a lot of judges, had cases in front of many judges in several different states, multiple counties within those states, and rarely did I come across what I would call a bad judge. And instead, I came across a lot of judges who were overworked and their dockets were crazy packed. They would have 100 cases on their morning docket. How do you handle 100 cases in 3 hours? And they were just trying to do the administration of law rather than dispensing justice. That wasn't their fault. They were handed the situation, and they probably would have loved to have had the luxury of time to devote to every case that it deserved. But I've also come across some judges who blew my mind. They were so caring and so in tune with human needs. Some of the best judges, well, actually the best judge that I ever had special needs child and divorce cases in front of, got it because he had a child of his own with special needs, with a seizure disorder. And he got it. When I would argue in these cases that children with special needs have, on the average, 3 times as many sick days as typical children, and how does that impact the primary caregiver's work schedule? Can they keep their job if they have that many absences? He got it. And because this judge had walked that path. And so when I would say that the parenting plan needed to stipulate that the parents had to equally divide the responsibility of sick days or of when the child had a crisis, a child with autism might have a meltdown at school. Are you just supposed to say, oh, well, I'll get off at 5 and pick them up? No. And can you just leave the child with the neighborhood 12-year-old babysitter after that situation? No. The child needs you there. That judge got it. And the problem is when things like that aren't addressed. Let's say that one parent says, oh, hey, you're the primary custodial parent, so yeah, sick days are on you. The non-primary parent can go to work, just blithely go through their workday that adds up to a work month, year, career, working full-time, getting promoted, getting raises, contributing to their company 401k or 403b plan or some other retirement plan. And the other parent is getting fired from a string of low-paying entry-level jobs that even if they do offer retirement plan, this parent cannot contribute nearly the same amount as the other parent does to theirs. So which parent is going to be impoverished in their old age?
These are discussions that aren't usually addressed.
Yes, and it should be addressed at the time of the divorce. There are ways to handle that. When they're distributing the existing retirement accounts at the time of the divorce and the property distribution, they can account for that. And they can also account for handling the sick days and other issues. You can't expect one parent to somehow support themselves if they're having the part-time or full-time job of making the appointments for the doctor visits, the treatments, doing the transportation to all of those things, and to the therapies. I mean, a lot of conditions recommend intensive intervention, which can be 30 hours a week of therapy. How do you do 30 hours a week of therapy plus the transportation to and from that, plus a 40-hour a week job? And if you have another child at home with or without special needs, how do you take them to their activities? How do you find time to go to the grocery store? How do you survive in that situation? All of these issues should be addressed in the parenting plan. When I got divorced in 2001, a typical pre-printed fill in the names of the parties and the birth dates of the children. That was about it. And which parent got parenting schedule A and which parent got parenting schedule B. And the pre-printed forms were, I think, 6 pages, 3 pieces of paper, front and back, pre-printed, prefab. In my case, I wrote our parenting plan, and I think it was 32 pages. And this divorce was successful. First of all, it was non-contested, and my child's father is also a lawyer. So if you think that 2 lawyers would be most likely to fight tooth and nail, there was no fight. We filed the papers, we waited 30 days plus 1, and we got the judge's signature. The judge asked a lot of questions about things like the parenting plan. Luckily, it was filed and assigned to the judge who had a special needs child of his own. So when he would ask questions as we went through the parenting plan in the non-contested hearing, I was able to answer his questions, and he understood why those things needed to be in that. But 2 years after the divorce, my child started one day speaking in paragraphs and now holds a bachelor's degree and has a master's degree and a Master of Fine Arts in screenwriting and is writing a series of novels that are futuristic fantasy with a social justice thread. So many of these children have amazing strengths and abilities, but they don't get a chance to shine and explore those talents they have because of issues not being addressed when they should have been in the family courts.
Yes, exactly. Especially for anybody who might be nonverbal. There's kind of a write-off, I think, that happens with a lot of them, that they're not capable. That is rarely, if ever, truly the case. Comes down to lack of support and lack of nurturing and lack of really working with what their strengths are. When you write a child off for various reasons, how do you expect them to actually thrive in any real way? And I'm very glad you brought up the court documents and how they are very cookie cutter, because I feel very strongly about this when it comes to mental health stuff, like disability forms, which have nothing to do with mental health and create this massive barrier if you are trying to file for disability for mental health. They're not specific to that. They're all for physical disability. When you're asked the question, well, when did the disability start? Do you just put your birthday? What do you do for there? And I feel like it's the same for a lot of this stuff, where they're not taking into account like the full, neurodiversity of children and people involved. So those things fall through the cracks so often.
Exactly. Yes. And by the way, the special needs issues in the family court system aren't limited to autism or other neurodiversity themes. They could be child has diabetes that's not controlled by diet or medication. It could be seizure disorder. It could be a child who's visually impaired. It could be a child with cancer. It could be so many different things. It could be a child who has survived horrific child abuse, would have special needs from that. And what a lot of people don't realize, and it can be tragic, is that children tend to blame themselves when their parents divorce. They think it was their fault. They were too much trouble. If they just had not been born, their parents would have had more time to themselves, more money, less work to do, less aggravation. That's tragic, to think that you are responsible for your parents' marriage breaking up. Now, consider a reasonably intelligent child with special needs and the parents breaking up. Now, that child would have that type of guilt magnified because they'd think, oh, I'm too much trouble. If I weren't alive, maybe my parents would get back together. I don't need to tell you where that kind of thinking can go and has gone in various cases. That should never happen. And part of the education of parents of children with special needs when they're going through divorce should be very clear that they need to assure their child it's not their fault. This is between mommy and daddy, or mommy and mommy, or daddy and daddy. It's between the parents. It's not your fault. When a child thinks that they're the problem, their condition, even their physical condition can deteriorate, and therapies that were working might not work anymore. They might not take their medication. It's sort of failure to thrive, but not in a baby. It would be in an adolescent where they've given up on life. And we should not be that kind of society where that can happen. People used to ask me, especially when my child was nonverbal, well, how can you have so much confidence in your child? I mean, the medical community gave no hope. They said to institutionalize my child when they were 2.5 years old, walk away and don't even go back to visit because there's no hope. That was a pediatric neurologist, MD. As I would tell people, how can I possibly expect my child to believe in themselves if I don't? And when I would be asked, well, how can you have confidence? I'd say, because I have to. I have to because it is essential for my child's success. But because so many of the special needs issues were handled in my divorce, I wasn't held back on what I wanted to do to help my child. I wasn't having to deal with an issue, for example, of a parent who refused to take my child to therapy. That wasn't an issue. We made the expectations clear, we put them in writing, and that then avoided horrible problems and limiting problems that would have limited my child for life. And conflict resolution is one of those things that must be written into a parenting plan. You can't have parents having to spend what limited resources, financial resources they have, constantly getting dragged back to court because they can't agree on a different medication or a different therapy. Sometimes pharmaceutical drugs that are appropriate for an 8-year-old don't work as well after the child hits puberty. A long-term condition will evolve over time. And just physical changes in a child. A child with cerebral palsy who uses a wheelchair. Well, they're going to outgrow the wheelchair. But if the other parent says, hey, that's why I pay you child support, go buy a new wheelchair. Right, I'll buy a $4,000 wheelchair out of $300 a month child support. There has to be a quick, fair way outside of the courts for these families to resolve disputes. And one way can be to appoint a high conflict family law mediator to the case at the time of the divorce so that down the road, when changes happen, and if one parent is uncooperative, they can get a resolution quickly. That kind of planning also should be modified in the parenting plans for in the future if we have another situation like COVID-19. So that when the courts are closed, parents can resolve conflicts in a way that's fair. You don't just say this parent is designated as the decision maker. No, that's not parenting. It's supposed to be a joint venture, a partnership. Treat each other with respect and address the things that you should address if this were your business partner and you're in the business of raising your child. And so do so as professionals. We don't know when the next big thing will hit. Eventually something else will happen. We don't know what it will be. Is it financial breakdown? Is it war? Is it some other pandemic? Or is it something that's not even on our radar yet? We don't even know what the category of a situation could be that might change life as we know it. But we do know now that we've made it through to this point how much life has changed since 2019. So if you refuse to learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. Let's not go there. We're all smart enough to know this can and eventually will happen again. We don't know in what form it will take, but families need to have a quick, less expensive, and fair way to resolve conflicts, whether the world's in a crisis or not. Some other issues, similar environment and routines in both households. A person who is neurodiverse, first of all, might struggle with transitions, and parenting plans often have cookie cutter schedule where, okay, the child is with mom every Monday and Tuesday, with dad every Wednesday and Thursday, and then they alternate the long weekends, Friday through either Sunday night or Monday drop off at school. Would you like to be living out of a suitcase like that for years? Now imagine if you are not neurodiverse, and not only are you living out of a suitcase, which, by the way, a lot of times we would say, instead of doing the standard schedule like that, we would do week on, week off. It would minimize so many transitions. In addition to living out of a suitcase, they would, let's say, Monday and Tuesday be in a household where they have their own bedroom, they have their visual schedule tacked up on the wall in the bathroom for morning routine, for taking a bath, for bedtime routine. Bedtime is set at a certain time and homework is done right after dinner. And then 2 days later, they're in a household where they share a bedroom with 2 other siblings or step siblings, and they fall asleep whenever the household finally quiets down. And morning routine, bath routine, bedtime routine, those are different every day. No predictability, no consistency. Now imagine as a child who's neurodiverse, how chaotic a life that would be. Now, some parents will say, well, this is just the way we do things in our house, and it's my house, it's my time, that you can't make me do it the same way that it's done at the other house. Well, yes, we can make you do this if the judge allows that in the parenting plan. And the family court system in the United States has the basic standard that the judge is not supposed to sign off on a divorce unless all the terms of the divorce are, quote, in the best interests of the child, close quote. If they don't address these important issues, the judge shouldn't be signing off on the case because it's not in the best interest of the child. And the judge absolutely has the right and the authority to sign off on paperwork that includes the terms that the child needs for their unique issues, because doing so is in the best interest of the child and it's enforceable. And so if a parent doesn't like those terms being in there, then they don't like the legal standard of best interests of the child.
Which raises a lot of questions.
Yes.
Do you think it's a lot of times it seems like there's a matter of a parent or the parents having difficulty giving up large level of control? You think when it comes to assigning a mediator, that's a common barrier between kind of the acceptance of that and utilization of it, or wanting to kind of be in control of everything and once again, not really putting the best interest of the child in mind?
Oh, absolutely. And I've actually mediated a lot of these cases. And the issue is seldom truly the current dispute. The issue is often what the marital dynamic was and what the expectations were going into becoming parents. And then those expectations are shifted, but they're still both parents and people don't like being told what to do. Also, many conditions are genetic, and various neurodiverse conditions also fall in this category. You might have a parent who is not neurodiverse who then has children who are not neurodiverse. But if the parent has lower support needs than the children, the parent might have never had a diagnosis. Doesn't change the fact that they're neurodiverse. But because they found ways through years of struggle of coping with a world that is not neurodiverse, how to succeed in the mainstream life and world and career and higher education, they might be in denial about their own situation, or they might feel that, well, I figured it out and my child needs to figure it out. So let's, kick out the crutches. They need to stand on their own. And they don't want some mediator who hasn't walked in their shoes and hasn't changed this child's diapers when they were little, making decisions for the parents. Yes, it's understandable, but the mediation is a tough role to play, but very, very much needed. Not all cases.
It'd be nice if it wasn't needed in all cases. So kind of going off of that, obviously there's a lot of changes parents themselves have to make, both I think personally and how they view parentage, which can get kind of, I think, sticky when you're dealing with sometimes very emotionally immature people who then become parents and yes, have to kind of navigate being essentially lower on the totem pole than somebody else in some instances. Once again, there are parents, even if they mean well, who aren't necessarily bad or psychologically abusive or anything like that, but they still at the end of the day have difficulty separating their child from an object that's they hold, that's they are in responsibility of. And the part of that responsibility are barriers in their way sometimes. They're difficulties to get over. Because I mean, and a lot of times it comes from burnout, parental burnout, which happens. It's not necessarily has to come from a place of not caring or anything like that. I think it's a mistake to assume that any parent who doesn't put their kids' needs forward or gets frustrated too often at them, or, in a case of divorce, tries to pony off responsibility on the other parent, is doing it purely out of not caring about the child. You bring to every situation, you bring your own stuff into it. And most people are very unaware that they're bringing their own stuff into things and needing to be able to step back and have somebody go like, hey, is this really about what's going on with your child, or is this really what's going on with your ex? Is it really something going on with something else in your life? How you viewing things? How much difficulty you're having in life right now? Because your child doesn't have anything to do with that, though often your child will internalize that in various different ways.
Yes. Well, mediation can be highly successful in situations like that because there's something called transformative mediation, in which the mediator sits with the parties, listens to them interact, and pretty quickly will recognize, okay, here's where this parent is coming from, and here's where the other parent is coming from. Get the parties to basically step into the shoes of the other parent and see and understand where they're coming from. And like you said, it's usually not that they're evil. It's that there's so much other stuff going on and a lifetime of baggage in their own lives, from maybe something from their childhood or their parents. So a mediator who engages in transformative mediation tries to get the parents basically to see the other parent for the first time and understand why they're doing what they're doing, to respect where it's coming from and what their needs are in the situation. And when they can understand the other parent, they can work more cooperatively with that parent. The process also opens the eyes of a parent to realize, oh, wow, now I know why I'm doing this. And, raising a child in a war zone because of my own stuff or because of things that happened years ago with my spouse and me is not the right thing to do. I don't know how, but I didn't realize I was doing that. And let's go forward and do better. Sometimes, no matter what one parent will advocate for the child, the other parent won't even hear the item. They won't, they'll shut off, and they're so busy thinking of what they're going to say in rebuttal that they're not hearing the conversation that's going on right at the table. And basically, if the other parent wants to do a certain type of speech therapy. The other parent might shut it down and refuse to cooperate just because it came out of the mouth of the other spouse, because they're so caught up in the fight. And that's where a good mediator can help them work through that. I remember one time I said to this devoted mother of a child with special needs, and I was mediating, who had such vitriol toward the father of the child because of infidelity that had happened early in the marriage. And basically, she decided she hated this man's guts. And I finally called a break in the mediation. And I said to her, if you go through the rest of your life like this, with such bitterness in your heart, that's like taking poison and expecting someone else to die. You are only hurting yourself, and the focus is on your hatred for your soon-to-be former spouse. Let's take that, put it up on a shelf somewhere. It's gone. Let's talk about your child and their special needs. And it was an aha moment for her, where it's always amazed me that people can do things so frequently and not even connect point A to point B. Oh, I'm doing this. No, what was going on with her internally was probably something like, I was so hurt by the affair 10 years ago, and they're still living there emotionally. And when someone points it out to them and says, you're going to be miserable for the rest of your life if you continue this, and your child deserves you to be present here and not fight constantly with the child's father just because he exists, because the father didn't have the courtesy to drop dead. It's fascinating to me. I think that if I ever studied psychology, it would be like falling down a rabbit hole, and I'd read everything I could find on it, and then I'd one day realize, oh, where did 10 years go?
And it never ends.
No, but human behavior is so fascinating, and you really do need to delve into people's emotions and motivations when doing a divorce for them, whether as a lawyer, mediator, judge. And then when you throw in people with special needs, either the one or more of the adults or one or more of the children, it makes it more complicated, but it also makes it more important to deal with the emotional and psychological noise in the background, because it impacts everything.
I always like to ask people, where are you living right now? Good thing to ask yourself: are you living in the past, the present, or the future? And to ask that question, not that there's a right or wrong answer, not to judge what your particular answer is, but just like, what are the benefits of living in one of those? What are the drawbacks of living in one of those for you? What happens if you change your position and start living somewhere else? Like if you're living in the past, well, what happens if you start living in the present? How does that change things? What are can you pull positives out of living in the past?
I think people don't even realize if it's all so blended in that your past has become a part of you, and it's really hard for people to separate. So that's why it's so important to work on yourself and work through the traumas so that you're not carrying it forward. And yeah, in that case that you talked about, the woman not seeing the damage she was creating for herself. I feel people are so caught up in emotions and hurt, and it's that ego, right? How can somebody do that to me? So if you let go of that ego, work on that, and accept people are different, and people do make mistakes. People have their own reasons why they do certain things, and just kind of make peace with yourself and detached from other people's actions. That's a lot of inner work. Progress will happen, and then see from the child's point of view and let go of our own issues. That's a lot of work, but we have to do it.
Oh, yes. And some days I will catch myself having an inner dialogue that I wouldn't let other people talk to me the way that I talk to myself internally some days. And when I recognize that, I say, whoa, okay, look in the mirror. see what you're doing to yourself and be kinder to yourself. The world needs a lot more kindness.
Totally. I think if you're kind to yourself, you're going to radiate that to the external world.
Yes.
Yeah. And so often I think we believe that being kind to ourselves is egotistical, or it's our responsibility to condemn ourselves in various ways. And no, like actually accepting yourself, and even accepting your flaws and being kind about your own flaws and where things maybe ended up for you, so you don't carry that into other situations, other relationships, and you ultimately just don't bleed on others. It takes maximum effort to start to come to that place, honestly. And it's not just, I think, going back to what you're talking about not only there needs to be personal change with people, but there also needs to be legislative change. A lot of that comes from people hopefully starting to reflect and come to their own experiences and be able to view their own experiences, so those changes can be made and can actually start to see those blank spots that need to be filled in, so the world can be more accommodating, even in situations such as, divorce. All situations should be accommodating for all types of different people and different types of situation. But the more you get stuck in your own purview, the less you're going to see that. And then, well, we get stuck on things that are grandfathered in over and over again until they stop really making much sense to most actual real situations that we end up falling into. So this has been one of the most enlightening episodes of this we've recorded. Honestly, I learned so much. This has been fascinating. So how can listeners connect with your work, as I know you've written some interesting scholarly articles, and find more information about this particular topic?
Well, my books are on Amazon, and they're in libraries as well across the country. And doing Google searches on special needs children in divorce, or special needs adults in divorce. I've written a lot of articles about it, and in the last 10 years, I'm finding that more people are doing research in this area and writing articles about it. They might have a slightly different focus, but still a parent could, or a lawyer or a judge or a mediator could learn some essential information from those articles as well. General background information that the general public doesn't have.
What recommendation do you have for parents so that they can talk the right language with lawyers and get them to see your work and use that in their practice so that it's actually implemented?
And this is from the parents' perspective?
Yeah, from the parents.
Yeah, we could do about a week-long episode on that. The short answer is look for the Parent Guide, Divorce and the Special Needs Child, Jessica Kingsley Publishers, UK, because it goes into why parents need to have the conversation with their lawyers, what issues need to be addressed, and how to deal with their lawyer's ego, because a lot of lawyers are thinking, well, look, I'm the lawyer, you're the parent, you just fill out these cookie cutter forms and I'll take it from here. And basically, for explaining to parents, you're the expert on your child. You're the expert on your child's needs. Your lawyer is the expert on the law. You can work together respectfully as both as experts in the different subjects. And the consequences, if their lawyer's kind of blowing them off, the consequences for the special needs child, short and long term, and for the entire family, if these issues aren't addressed. I recommend for people who are trying to find a lawyer who might be receptive or even have experience in these kinds of cases to go to the website of the Special Needs Alliance. I think it's specialneedsalliance.org, but it might be slightly different from that. And this is an organization of lawyers who primarily handle things like special needs trusts in estate planning and other similar topics, or disability, people filing for disability benefits. But they might know someone in their local area who would be receptive to a case like this in family law.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Very,
Thank you
and
for.
I'll include all of that in the show notes as well. Link to your book,
Thank you.
everything else, and I'll also be sure to really just pull in a lot of like recommended reading for other articles I can find on this particular topic and other resources. Just to try to turn the show notes for this episode a little bit to a resource hub for anybody listening who's interested. You can find. I'll make sure to put a lot of different things in there for everybody
That's
because
fantastic. Thank you.
oh, of course. Because it's like I said, I learned so much from this because these are things you just don't usually think about. And until, you have to think about them. And by then, sometimes it's usually too late. So it's good to just keep yourself educated, even if it's not a situation you're necessarily in right now. Know about what's going on in the world. And I really want to thank you, Dr. Price, for coming on. It's been really lovely having you.
Thank you. And thank you for letting me get the word out to your audience. Hopefully I was able to help someone.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing so much. As Mike said, it was enlightening, and I'm sure it was the same for our audience.